What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. Quick shout out to sponsor Mecca Fitness. You want six pack in a box? You want it to be easy? You know what they say? It's 80% diet and like 20% workout. Well, Mecca takes care of the 80% part, and that way you can have fun doing the 20% part. So order Mecca. Here's a coupon code, and yeah, achieve all of your dreams this new year. Today we have on Jeff Kirkham. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Jeff's done a lot of really cool stuff. Started out, this probably isn't where you started out. Started out fighting MMA at 16 against 24-year-olds, but then went into the military with Special Forces, one of the early founders of Black Rifle Coffee, an author. He has a book that's actually just about to come out for you to watch. Is it in theaters or streaming?
It'll be in theaters.
In theaters.
Homestead in theaters.
The Homestead. You've seen the billboards. If you're watching this, I guarantee you've seen the Instagram ads. So go check that out. He's the inventor of Rat's Tourniquet. He's done a whole slew of stuff. He has his own wellness retreat called Mustang Medicine. And dude, you're just doing so much. Like entrepreneur, like you're doing health and wellness stuff. You're serving people. Like it's sweet. So I'm super stoked that you're here.
He's HD on steroids.
Well, now some people are saying that's like they want to like medicate that, but some people are saying it's just
crazy.
Superpower.
It is. It absolutely is a superpower. You don't want to medicate it. You want to use it. You want to understand it, and you want to control that as best as you can because that indicates a mind. It's like a bunch of the literature that I've read, and actually ADHD is an indicator of a highly intelligent brain. It's just moving super fast. And so because some people have a hard time with people's brains that are moving fast, and modern society, we love to say, here, take this pill and slow down, where it's like, no, let's see how we can use this and control it and put it down an avenue so that if we can get that to focus, even as kind of ironic as that sounds, it could be hugely, hugely powerful.
Well, like one of the debates right now is so I know a lot of pediatricians, and all of them that I know of prescribe a lot of Ritalin and like Adderall to kids. And I just have these debates with them sometimes, and sometimes I don't, because I'm like, it gets tiring to, because they're the medical professional and they've gone to school, and so they feel like they know all the information, right? Which in theory, I think they should know way more than me. Like that's for sure. I'm not saying I really know anything, but I'm like, well, what if we just refocused kids in schools and like actually helped them do stuff? But like when it comes to like ADD, ADHD in kids, what's your opinion on how to actually pull their talents out of them and help them succeed rather than just medicating them?
Well, I believe first and foremost, before we do anything, we've got to clean up the diet, right? Because any inflammation that's in the diet, so
we're on the same team. I love that you're saying.
Diet. You cannot. So the guy that I started Mustang Medicine with, he has this dog, and it's a little blue heeler, right? And his name is Scout, and Scout looks like a hot dog, right? So Scout is a fat dog. Now, mind you, this guy. His name's Hugh Vale. He trains wild Mustangs, and he lives on a ranch, and he's working with horses and stuff. So Scout gets a lot of exercise. And it's like you said at the beginning of the podcast, 80% of what you're doing, 75, 80% of what you're doing is the most important. And that is 25% for working out and whatnot. So if we extrapolate that information, we pull that back. And it's funny that you say that, because a good buddy of mine, his name is Dave DeHoyas. He was Mr. Utah 5 times.
There's an idea. I've heard of Dave.
He had, this was back in the 90s, right? He had striations in his glutes and in his legs before any of the pros did.
Which people don't know, like how impossible it is to get to that. You have to be like sub 7.5%.
Unbelievable. Like this guy, his looked like cellophane was on his skin. You probably look up pictures of him on the internet. He told me one day, he was like, Jeff, 75% of bodybuilding is diet. So pulling that back before we do anything with kids. Let's get them off of the foods that we know cause inflammation.
So like no cereal, like Lucky Charms, or
Yeah, let's limit the sugar, let's limit the dyes, let's limit the chemicals. If you can't pronounce it and it's on the back of the box, it ain't good. Like bread should be like 4 ingredients. If you're eating cereal, then it should be like 4 ingredients. And let's get rid of the seed oils. This is all the stuff that RFK is coming out against. But before we dope kids up, that's such a Western mindset thing. If like you have a problem, here's your silver bullet, take a pill. Oh, there's another one. And so what we do is we just treat the symptoms. We tend to not treat the cause. And I'm a healthcare provider, so I have my master's in nursing. So I could say this where it's like, no, we have a problem in this country, and it's actually spread out to the rest of the world. Of we tend to treat symptoms, we tend not to treat what the cause is. If you get in a car wreck and you have a traumatic episode, the only place I want to be is in the United States of America. We are amazing at saving and fixing the machine once it breaks. We are lousy at keeping the machine from breaking. And it starts with these kids, right? Let's get them on good diets. There's several studies that were done, and the literature is pretty clear. When they take kids and they put them on clean diets where the food is actually being made in the school versus prepackaged processed garbage, the instance of discipline problems plummets. Because it's inflammation, right? It's inflammation. Where if I eat something that creates inflammation in the body, I'm creating a cortisol response that then activates the stress, the sympathetic nervous system. And it's like, well, of course I've got kids going crazy because I'm feeding them crazy pills.
well, it really makes so much sense. Like, though I don't know if it's an adage or what, but all of my friends who are nutritionists, they typically are like, you don't know what to eat, and just go eat the stuff on the outside of the grocery store.
Right.
Anything you're going to get in the middle, like you said, you're going to see a bunch of stuff. You don't even know what it is, how to pronounce it. Like, don't go into those middle aisles. Just stay around the fruits, vegetables, meats, and then you're good. Because I do like MMA, right? So I hang out with a lot of people that don't have a ton of money. So they're like, hey man, I want to do your meals. And a lot of them will do like 1 or 2 meals a day. But to get 100% of their macros just for meal prep can get pretty expensive. Relatively speaking, I think it's cheap for most people that are working a consistent good job. But what I tell them, like, we have so many great tools now, like ChatGPT, where you could be like, hey, here's my macros. Hey, what's a good macro calculator? You can even go find that online and then just plug that into ChatGPT and be like, hey, what are some recipes that'll help me hit this macro with Whole Foods?
There you go. Yeah.
Or what are some restaurants that can provide that? Although I'll say this, when it comes to seed oils and all of that kind of stuff, that what they cook with at restaurants, I know of hardly any that actually cook with good ingredients. They're very, very, very few. So
Yeah, eating out. I mean, if you sit down and you look at it with a sober mind, right? Eating out is, I mean, the food may taste good, but you're flipping a coin. Like literally, you're flipping a coin if it's good, wholesome food, and it's expensive. And if you're living on a budget, eating out is not. It's not a good plan.
well, it's not good. And like being in the food industry, you have to make money. And food is one of the hardest industries to be profitable and be successful at. And so, like you said, the food, if you want to have a successful food business, the food, number one, has to taste good. But then you have to be able to provide it at a price that people can afford, or a borderline can afford, or can afford a few times a week. And so you're doing that, but then you're also trying to make it as cheaply as possible. Most people aren't like health and wellness people. So like, how do I make something taste good and make it for cheap? And they're not thinking it's like going to be bad for them. Most people, that doesn't even cross their mind. They're just want good, tasty food that people will love. And
the problem you're going into is wholesome food isn't full of preservatives, so it tends to go bad fast. So you have to. What we used to do when we were getting our meal preps for a while is we would get the meals and we'd immediately throw them in the freezer. Yeah. So, I mean, do they taste as good as the day they hit the doorstep? No, but they still taste really, really good. And so, but that was one of those things where it's like, oh, okay, I'm hungry. Now we but I'm in a hurry. 6 minutes, you got a meal, and away you go, and you don't feel like you've, you know, drank a bottle of like soybean oil or something.
Oh, dude, that's literally it. You're literally hitting all the all the things that I love. So starting out like in high school, where are you from? Like, how did you get into MMA so young? Like, how did you even go from that to the military to what you're doing now? Take me on the wild ride.
So, so I grew up. My dad was in the Air Force. So we moved all over. So whereas we were moving every couple of years, and so I only wanted to be two things in my life when I was a kid. So usually when you talk to a kid and you're like, "Hey Johnny, what do you want to be when you grow up?" I want to be a firefighter. Or I want to be a, a policeman.
Yeah, I thought I was going to make it to the NFL until I was like
NFL
12 or
or something. And so my mom one day, my mom's this little old lady from the South. She's super sweet lady, and she asked me what I wanted to do, and I was like, Mom, I want to be a mountain man. And my mom was like, oh my goodness, where did you come from? And then so I want to be a mountain man because there's this great movie called The Mountain Men with Charlton Heston in it. It came out back in the 80s, and for where it left an impression on me. But I want to be a mountain man before that. But and then I met a guy down the street who was a sergeant major in the special forces. He was a Green Beret, and I was friends with his son. And this guy, for whatever reason, I don't think he had shared more than probably 10 sentences with me. But I was just like, that's what I want to do. I'm going to be a Green Beret. I had no idea what a Green Beret was. I was like, that's what I want to do. That's cool. And so from about the time from sixth grade, and so then I ended up joining the Guard when I was 17. I went to basic training at jump school between my junior and senior year of high school, which is, you could never do that today. So like my recruiter, who I still know today, I'm buddies with him still today, 30 some years later. And he basically did some pencil whipping and got me into jump school and stuff.
So it wasn't even like a thing then. Like he just kind of pulled some strings and
yeah, because there was there was computers, but it was old DOS systems, and it was like,
he wrote the last letter of your birthday, like a little hard to read.
Well, the 17, you can join when you're 17, but you have to have parents' signatures. So I joined when I was 17. It was called the delay entry program back then. But anyways, fast forward. So I had been in martial arts because I want to be a Green Beret, right? Well, all Green Berets know how to, and then a little while after that, Rambo came out and was like, oh, you're going to know how to fight and all this stuff. And so I'd always been interested in martial arts. I started doing judo when I was like in the sixth grade or something. And then I wrestled through high school. But back then,
It was a great combo.
there was it was a great combo, and back then there was no MMA. It was like wrestlers, like your career ended after high school, and if you were really good, you went to college, and then your career absolutely ended, and then like the 1% of the 1% would go to the Olympics
Or the WWE.
or the
WWE. Or with the band that it wasn't even the WWF then.
Yes, that's World Wrestling Federation, WWF.
It was okay.
And so, anyway, so long story short, I started that. It was called kickboxing or PKA style. So it was all above the belt, all above the waist, kicks, and you had kick counts and all of that. And then Muay Thai. So Kathy Long, and there was Von Damme made the movie. Who the guy, I can't remember what his name was, but he was a world Muay Thai champion, and he was a gringo. And then Kathy Long, who was a Thai fighter, all of a sudden it started coming to the U.S. and I saw it, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, "That's the future."
Yeah, people's legs are just probably getting wrecked. People's getting their legs kicked, and they don't know how to handle it. And then
so we were the team I was on. So we were a Dutch style kickboxing team. So the Dutch had meshed Muay Thai with Western boxing. It was a very effective thing. So Boss Rudin is a great example of what that style looks like.
Is that what Bang is kind of now?
I'm not sure.
Bang Muay Thai?
It may.
I think that was like based off the Boss Rudin.
Because everybody is. I mean, it's like the buffet, right? You take what you want, and you leave the rest behind. So the Thai is traditionally fought like this. Well, I mean, you box like that, you're going to get knocked out. So it was back to traditional boxing, but the kicks were Thai, and then those got tweaked, so they were more linear versus circular. And so anyways, long story short, so I started in that, and started fighting. I was like, well, I got to know how to fight. So the only way to know how to fight is you got to get in the ring. And so I started doing fight cards when I was about 16, and I fought. I think my last fight is I was 31 or something like that. I think was my last fight, and so which was an MMA fight. But I was doing like bare knuckle fights and stuff like that. And I was just, I mean, I probably lost more fights than I won, but I just really I liked fighting.
What's your defense? I don't know many kids that are like 16, 20 years old having fights. Like, what were you fighting other kids at all, or was it mostly all just adults?
No, it was adults. It was people in their 20s and stuff. So there were a couple times I got smashed, but it was like, oh, okay.
What'd your parents think? Like,
I didn't tell them.
oh my gosh.
So so I didn't tell them. And so, because my mom and dad were vehemently against boxing, they thought it was horrible. So so I was 17, almost 18, and I had a fight, and they were like, "Look, you gotta." I'd basically been forging my parents' signature so that I could get in the ring, and they were like, "Look, we need parents' signature." And by now, you kind of get lackadaisical a little bit, and so I was like, I'll take it down to my dad. He won't know. And so I showed it to my dad, and I was like, hey, can I get your signature? I'm doing this exhibition fight. And he was like, I was like with the main event, right? And he was like, yeah, sure, I want to come down and watch. And I was like, oh, no, you don't need to watch it. So anyways, he's like, no, I'm going to come down and watch. And I was like, you really don't need to. And he's like, oh, yes, I do. And so, because I'm showing up with bruises and stuff. And so anyways, he comes down and he was like, this is boxing. And I was like, no, it's a little different. He's like, no, it's not. He totally busted me. And I'm like, well, I was like, hey, I'm like one of the main events, and like, you need to sign the card so I can fight. And so he was furious with me. And then in the end, he was like, all right, I'm signing this, but we're going to talk when we get home. And so went in and I won the fight by decision, but and the rest, as they say, is history. Because then I turned 18 like a few months later, and I didn't need his signature. So,
what did you think after he watched it? Was he like, did it like make him like more interested, or was he more pissed?
No. It was. So my dad he's a football fanatic. So it's not that he's against violence or anything. He was in Vietnam and stuff like that, but it was more like, it was one of those where he was torn, where he was like, half of him was like super proud, and half of him was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to explain this to my wife, type thing,
Yeah.
So no, he was a big advocate for me, and he always came to my wrestling matches and stuff like that. So I can't. It was just one of those where we just didn't talk about it afterwards. And,
Yeah, maybe I'll show that. That's something. Like, one of the things I wish I did the most, because I tried to. I rode the bench on the basketball team because I was like 6 feet when I was 12. So there I was like center, and like, this guy's gonna be huge. By the time sophomore year rolled around, they still had me playing center, and I was like, bro, there's guys that are like 6'6" that are 15, 16 years old now.
wow.
And so I just never grew anymore. But I was just like stuck with basketball. But my football coach, he was the wrestling coach, and anyone that's from like Utah in the 90s and early 2000s, Orem High like won state in wrestling for like 12 years straight.
Oh wow.
Yeah, like a ton of. I don't know if it's 12. I'm just throwing a number out there, but it was a ton of years. It wasn't like 4 or 5, which would be good. It was like crazy. And this guy's actually wild. So like my football coach, he wrestled actually at Orem High too. And then he ended up going to Snow College and being on the wrestling team at Snow College. Interesting. And ended up taking second in nationals.
Wow.
Yeah. Like he was an All-American
That's
regular
yeah.
from Snow College.
It's funny how the shift has happened where Utah, like wrestling. When I was wrestling, it was like, yeah, wrestling. But now, like, couple years, so my boys wrestle. I don't know if they'll wrestle this year, but last year down where we live, there was probably 100 kids, because they do Pee-wees all the way up to the high school. There must have been 100 kids, and I was like, oh my gosh, Utah is becoming a kind of a hub for wrestling. There's wrestling tournaments like every weekend.
And huge ones.
Big ones. Big ones. Yeah, it's like, wow, this is really interesting.
Well, it's such a great sport all around. Like, because I played football and I played rugby, but like I would have been way better tackler if I learned wrestling. And then you learn better technique and better form, and then like adding that with jujitsu, like you're like, okay, I played in this adult tackle football league like 2 years ago, and after having done jujitsu for a little bit and now tackling as like an adult, like it's way easier and way bad. And people are like, oh, like, is it hard on your body? And I'm like, no, not really. Because I just play defensive end. So I just was going against these massive guys that were slower than molasses. And I'm like 220. And so just running right past them and then just swarm tackling. And like, I'm so danged and bruised. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I feel pretty good.
I'll tell you, jiu-jitsu, when I found jiu-jitsu, so the same guy I was telling you about, the bodybuilder, Dave, introduced me to this guy that was teaching jiu-jitsu, and this was back in 90, was that 95, 96? Somewhere on there. And so come to find out, it's Pedro Sauer, if you've ever heard of him.
Yeah.
So Pedro is like one of the first non-Gracie black belts.
But he was trained by all of them.
But
Like,
he grew up with it. Yes, that's right. And Pedro is like the nicest guy on planet. He's like the nicest, most humble guy. And so Pedro and I, we became friends, and we were working out in the gym together. And like I'd take him to the gym and I would just crush him in the gym. I was like twice as strong as he was. And then we would go do jiu-jitsu, and the dude's not even looking at me. He's not even paying. He's like conducting class, and he's like finishing me like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is Kung Fu action theater. This is the real magical Kung Fu that does exist. And it was like the whole other side of wrestling that I'd never been exposed to. And I was like, oh.
But people don't realize what that means. Is because like you're one of the baddest dudes around. So like by the time you introduce them, you've already trained martial arts, wrestling, Muay Thai. Like you've been involved in this world. And for Pedro to just come roll you up is probably like pretty shocking.
Oh, it was actually like I have a very,
because he's not a big guy. What is he like?
I mean, he was like 170 maybe. I mean, I'm like 5'7", 5'8", and he's like 5'7", 5'8". Like I'm over 200 pounds. Even back then, like I used to fight at, it's like I was fighting. I used to, when I was on the fight cards, I fought at 175, and then as I got older and I put on more size, I would fight at like 198. Which was pretty big.
Yeah, that's scary.
Because like the dudes I was fighting were like way taller than me. But so Pedro and I were like similar size. I outweighed him, but it was like literally it was like magic. Like I knew he was getting my arm, and I'm like, you can't have my arm. No, dang it. And it was amazing. And so like I deep dove jiu-jitsu for, I don't know, for a long time, and loved it. Had a blast doing it, and then started mixing that with MMA when I moved back up to Seattle up there. And so it was cool. I mean, it's just been a super cool adventure. I look for those things where I've got those. It's like, okay, where's my deficits? Okay, I'm gonna learn more about that, and I'm gonna do more of that, and which is probably why I'm still in school to this day.
Well, constantly learning. You can't stop. If you don't use it, you lose it, right?
Wow.
So you got to keep it rolling. And like Pedro's like the dad of jiu-jitsu of all of Utah.
Yes.
Like all the major gyms started. Like my guy, I know you might have done it, Paul Tom, where I go. But he was one of Pedro's main dudes. So he took over Pedro's school in Orem, and has been still doing it.
So it was buying the insurance company back there.
Yeah. And now it's his place, and now he's an American Fork. And so if you do jiu-jitsu in Utah, probably started with him.
Yeah, there's probably some lineage that started there. Yeah, for sure.
So like you get into like the military straight out of high school. What was that like? Like how long were you doing it? How'd you get into special forces? Where did you
So I started out because in special forces, right? So the best kept secret in SOF, Special Operations Forces, best kept secret in SOF is is Special Forces National Guard. So the National Guard reserves are they different? Yeah, but for the sake of this, they're identical. So it's reserve special forces. All the training's the same. The trips are the same. The dudes are all former, active duty or stuff. Most of the guys that get out, they're cops. So they're doing a lot of the work in between like trips and stuff like that. It was a tremendous amount of experience. Before the war, we had more experience than anybody on active duty did because a bunch of us. I'd been in the reserves or guard, then I'd gone on active, then I'd gotten back out and went back to the 19th group, the guard, and then I was a special agent with the DEA up in Seattle. So I'm kicking doors and handling sources and doing all the intel and, the tactical planning stuff. And then the war in Seattle that at the time was leading the nation in heroin overdoses.
Topic time.
At the time, yeah. It may still be there. I don't know. But, we were working ICE cases, the first ICE cases to come to the U.S. ICE is pure methamphetamine. And the first ICE cases, like I was doing the buys, I was working undercover, at long hair and stuff. And at one point there was hair here. And so anyways, having a blast. And so because working narcotics was a lot of fun. And you had this sense of like, you were doing good, because the people we're going after were legitimately bad people. We targeted violent drug offenders. We weren't going to, if somebody had a joint or something, it was like, get out of here, And I was just telling the story to somebody else. It's like we had a guy in the office that was working a mushroom case, and we all kind of made fun of him because it was like, there's real drugs out there, right? Like heroin and crack, and it's like that methamphetamine is like, it's like, all right, keep working your mushroom case. Good luck with that, But so anyways, so I had done that. So I'd been in the guard. Then I was on active. Then I went back to the guard when I was law enforcement, and then the war kicked off. And so 19th Group, we got mobilized when it looked like we were going to invade the Philippines. We went to the Philippines and then came home from the Philippines. We didn't invade the Philippines because the Abu Sayyaf was over there. They were tied in with Al Qaeda, and then came home, and then we got mobilized for the invasion of Iraq. And so as a team sergeant, went over there for the spin up prior to, and then did the invasion, which was like, it was an amazing experience.
What was that like? Because I thought it was like such like a crazy time in American history where it's like, I feel like, I don't know if there's been unity like that right after 9/11.
Essentially it's like, let's get some payback. Afghanistan was going on. And so what had happened was there was part of 19th Group, they had gone to Afghanistan. So a bunch of my buddies, they were here in Utah, they were mobilized, they went to Afghanistan. The rest of the group had already gone to Afghanistan. It was like, look, it looks like we're going to go to Iraq and invade Iraq. So you guys are going to go with 5th Group, over 5th Special Forces Group. You guys are going to go over and augment those guys. So we actually landed, we got there before they did. And then we built up and for a little bit, and then the invasion happened. So as a team sergeant, we were the SIFSOC commander, General Harrell, who's dead now, rest his soul. He's a fantastic guy. He was the former Delta Force commander, and then he was the SIFSOC commander. I was detailed to my team was detailed to him as his contingency team, and so we launched out of Qatar. My team went in first. And it was like something it was kind of like something out of the movies where it's like,
first battle, like real.
This is the first, pretty kind of first one. It was the first major combined forces thing because here we're on a EC-130, which is an electronic C-130. So they're jamming the whole way. We flew in from Qatar. We came in, we hit the river, you have the Tigris and the Euphrates coming down. We hit the river, they put that down, and I swear we were like, they could have had the wheels out and we would have been going down the ground because they shot some surface to air missiles at us as we were going up. So then it turned into Mr. Toad's Wild Ride as they were flying like this in this big 130, And so we fly in Baghdad. The tanks had already hit Baghdad. So it's in the middle of the night, right? It's like 2 o'clock in the morning or something. Tanks had already pushed past, mech infantry guys had already pushed past the airport. And then what had happened is we came in, once the airport is taken, then we'll start landing aircraft, the Americans will. And we just start offloading supplies and groups like me. And so we came in, we landed. I think they told us we were like the fourth or fifth plane to land in Biap. So the aircraft comes in, slams on the ground. The propellers, they can turn them backwards to slow the aircraft down. So they turn the propellers backwards to slow the aircraft down and stand on the brakes. Meanwhile, the ramp is going down. It's pitch black outside, and everybody's amped up, especially the aircraft, because they're a great big huge target sitting on the tarmac. And the crew chief is like, "Get out!" And we had gun trucks that we drove off the back, and then crew chief, gave him the thumbs up, and then the aircraft. The whole thing took like 3 minutes, and we were trucks and everything off, everybody out, and then the aircraft took off. We're standing on the tarmac. You can hear the tanks moving, so it sounds like something out of a World War II movie. There's fires going in the distance. It's dead quiet except for the tank treads that you can hear. There's tracer fire going off and stuff, and it was like, oh my gosh, this just got real. It's like it was a surreal experience. And then combat controllers, who runs the airports like that, Air Force Combat Controllers, CCTs, who are amazing special operations, came over on like a little motorcycle, and he was like, get off the tarmac. There's another aircraft coming. I was like, grab all our stuff, get off the tarmac. And yeah, and so that was my first trip. And then I went between Iraq and Afghanistan. I went back and forth almost nonstop for about 13 years. So the first 3 or 4 years, like I was.
How many deployments is that?
I don't know. The first 3 or 4 years, I'd come home for a couple weeks, and then I'd head straight back and I was doing about 120 days or so, and then come back, and then it was like, okay, kind of shake the cobwebs out of your head. And then it was like, all right, you need to go back out. And so it's like, all right, tow my bags and take back off out. And then so I was back and forth. So I was averaging probably 9 months or so out of the year. I mostly worked Afghanistan, so I was working the programs over there. So probably 9 months or so a year, or sometimes more. And so racked up a lot of time doing the operation. So what we do is we had special forces were known as what's called a force multiplier. So, and I was in a special group, and so we were very small entities typically. Sometimes it would grow, sometimes it would contract, but we were small entities. So it was like me and 3 other guys, and then we would lead, train, and advise local guys that were our commandos. They worked directly for us, so it wasn't the traditional Afghan army or anything like that. And so we would get these guys, and during the day we'd try to cram as much information between their ears as we could. And then about 3 o'clock, the target packets would start coming in. It's like, okay, get your rifle. We're going to start going through the planning process. We'd go through the planning process, then we'd start going through rehearsals. Then it was like, okay, get your kit. Final combat inspections. We'd jump on the helicopters and go hit targets. And so we did that for, years.
What was your targeting team like? How many of you were there?
It would depend. So depending on what we were doing, like I hit targets and there was 5 of us, where we were grabbing guys, Al-Qaeda or facilitators, Al-Qaeda, Taliban facilitators, Taliban guys. We had missions where we were literally grabbing them off the street, and we'd track them. They'd come out of like a over there they've got like these little shops where they'll go in, where their internet, I forget what
There's
the
our
term is.
cafes.
Internet cafe, thank you. And they would come up, the intel would be tracking, and they would just know that this guy Here they'd be able to track it back, and they're like, okay, this guy's at this cafe. We'd have some type of a description with them or something, or we would have a source that knew the guy. And then when they'd come out, they'd be walking down the street, and we would, basically tackle them and manhandle them, throw them in a van, and take them off so they could get interrogated. And then once they got interrogated by the bit teams, the battlefield interrogation teams, then they would get more intel. Then more target packets would come from that, and then we just roll that and keep rolling and see where, how far you could take it. And then we did that, or we would go in with trucks. We drove around in Toyota Hiluxes mostly because we were hiding the hand of the Americans. And all the way up to, we did full, 6-ship air assaults. So a ship being a helicopter, right? And you would get a whole bunch of our guys and load up on, X number if we were doing hits with the Rangers or with the SEALs. SEALs predominantly were in Afghanistan for some weird reason. So the Tier 1 forces, the Army guys were in Iraq, and then the Navy guys were in Afghanistan, even though water was nowhere close. But that's just how politics worked. But yeah, so we do these massive air assaults and take whole villages down sometimes, and kind of everything in between.
So how many of those, like, we were targeting like a person, and you're just getting them to get interrogated, turn into like full scale engagements?
Gunfights?
Yeah.
The key, we used to plan to do things so that we stayed out of getting in gunfights, because anytime shooting starts, you're throwing the dice, right? The bad guy's got an AK, he's got 30 chances in that magazine to hit something or somebody. And so we would do everything that we could. If a perfect assault would be, we'd go to the compound at about 2:00 in the morning. So in Afghanistan, they're compounds, right? And the compound is like a little castle. So the walls are like 12, 14 feet high. They're like 3 feet thick. And then they had a big metal gate. And so sometimes we'd use explosives and blow the metal gate. But if we could, we would put ladders on the walls, and we would ninja up over the walls and down. And then the assault force would go in super quiet. And so a perfect assault was, you're tapping on the guy's chest with a muzzle in his face saying, "You're coming with us." And nothing ever happened. Nobody in the neighborhood ever knew we were there. And that guy just basically gets rolled up, anybody else, and out of the compound and away. And so that would be, if we could do that, we do that. How many times did it turn into fights? I mean, there was a significant number of fights. You get compromised because, they got smarter, right? You're not dealing with dummies. Like, all the dummies got killed pretty early on in the war, right? And then the guys that survived were actually, the later on in the war you got, the more, in some ways, the more dangerous it got, because they had learned tactics and techniques. So we were constantly adjusting to them. They were constantly adjusting to us.
So you're on their home turf.
And we're on their home turf, right? And so, perfect example is like roadside bombs, right? And so these guys would sit there with radios, and they would set off these roadside bombs. So what did we do? We'd get jammers so that we could jam the signal to keep them from being able to hit the roadside bombs. So they knew we had jammers, so they would switch to cell phones. And so they would use cell phones to set off the explosives. So then we would up the jammers that were there. Problem with jammers is it worked on your stuff too. Like our Indige, our host nation guys, our commandos, or Afghans, they couldn't talk. And so then the bad guys they'd be like, okay. And then they would just get a command detonation, which is a wire. So it's a hardwired to the explosive, and they'd just get, 1,000 feet of wire that they pulled out of, a house or something. And then they'd sit there with a battery and just touch it. Well, there's no way to jam that. And so it was a constant cat and mouse game between the two of us. And then armored vehicles came in, and they were like, okay. And they would just put more explosives in. And so, more explosives is harder to hide, but still, I mean, so we had strikers. I mean, there was one thing that we reacted to. A striker went across a a bridge. And anyways, this striker, they had these mine resistant plates that were on the bottom to help if they ran over something, that it would stop and a striker's like an armored vehicle that's got dudes in the back and a driver up at the front. And so they'd have these mine resistant plates on the bottom. Well, one of the charges that we would do is if you put explosives on the bottom of a plate, you could create what was called a platter charge. And we would use this sometimes to destroy vehicles, or we would use it in our own ambushes and whatnot. And it would, big piece of metal, go flying, which obviously caused problem. They had enough explosives that mine resistant plate on the bottom of the striker became a platter charge. So the guys that were in the back were vaporized. I mean, vaporized. And the guy that was the driver, like he's alive and essentially untouched, but I mean, it knocked him senseless, and he's sitting out there and he's like, they're all gone, and so, and it was this constant cat and mouse game of like bigger, less, smarter. And so how many times did it turn into fights? I mean, there were quite a few fights, but you've got to remember, I was there for
It's one of the most I've ever heard anyone being out.
Yeah, look, I'm a glutton for punishment.
That's like, yes. So like, what finally made you decide to get out? Or
well, that's a great question. And that's actually is probably the biggest thing that made me get out was my wife was dropping me off. I was leaving again, right? My wife was dropping me off at the
she
airport.
must be a saint.
She is, and she was part of the community as well. So so we had that connection. I never felt like I had to hide anything from her or do like, I can't tell you that because it's top secret and any of that. She was very much part of the community. As a matter of fact, we spent 2 years in Afghanistan together right after we'd gotten married. So she would help put target packets together.
It's a prime situation.
And then yeah, in some ways it was a little weird because it was still dangerous, right? Because we had insider threats inside of the base too, where we would have guys that would, their families would get kidnapped by the Taliban, and they were like, "Look, you're gonna help us, would get some of these Americans, or we're gonna start killing your family." And so these guys, I'm not going to say it's right, but these guys are just like, "Look, it's some American or my family. The American's going to lose." And so, knock on wood, we never had what was called a blue on green, or a green on blue, sorry, where the Afghans had actually murdered one of the advisors. We never had that, but we certainly had a few guys that we knew had were working against us, and we were able to capture them. So it was still a little bit catchy, but like my wife will tell people, she's like, "Yeah, I used to get target packets," because she's running sources, and she's like, "We get target packets, we develop them, and then we'd give them to Jeff and his guys." And then she was like, "And then I watch them on Kill TV, because we'd have overhead ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. So we have Predator or Reaper or whoever else was up there that it was filtering down through the signal, and they could watch the IR feed on the thing." And she was like, "Oh, there's Jeff right there going across, moving over to the target." So it was kind of a very strange relationship. We're still married very happily, going on 20 years next year. So next year in a few months. But so the thing that why I stopped, because when it was just myself and my wife, I was kind of like, something happens to me, she'll be fine, And then we had our first son, and he was 2 years old, and my wife was dropping me off at the airport. And so I opened it, we had a minivan, right? And open up the slider on the side, and here's my 2-year-old son, and he's like the gem of my life, it's like my son, and he's sitting in his car seat, and he's sitting there, and he's looking down at the floor. And I'm like, "Hey, Papa's leaving, give me a hug." And he wouldn't look at me because he knew I was leaving again, because I was gone a lot. And he was like looking at the floor. I'm like, "Hey, Papa's leaving, Papa's leaving. And so I kind of gave him a hug, and he wouldn't look at me. And I'll tell you what, it broke my heart. So I walked in the airport, and like I had tears, and like the TSA guys I get a little frosty thinking about it today. And TSA guys are looking at me like, what's this guy's problem, And I'm just like, and it was that moment where I was like, man, this isn't cool anymore. And then I was going to a new place that we hadn't typically been going to. And so we had a fledgling force that was there of a bunch of guys who were a bunch of criminals that we were trying to convert over to working with us in support of the global war on terror. Anyways, long story short, they turned on us. And so I ended up probably the closest call I ever had to ending up in the stew pot with somebody. And because it was me and me and two other dudes, and there were 200 of them. And so, so it was sketchy. So the people who were supposed to come rescue us they weren't listening to the radio. And so story for another time. But it was a little sketchy. So I came home, and at that point I was like I was like one of the top 5 most deployed guys in my unit. And so I came home, did the debrief, and they're like, you need to take a break. And I was like, yeah, I need to take a break. And so, so then I got loaned out, and I was helping train and develop curriculum for some of the protection guys. And that's where Evan Hafer and we had known each other in special forces for years and years and years and years prior to that. As a matter of fact, I was his team sergeant back in the early days, like for the invasion and stuff. I had left right as the invasion was happening and went to another team. But so anyways, we reconnected, and then and the rest is kind of history where and then Evan, and they started Black Rifle Coffee and all that, because he was in the same boat. He was like, look, I got to get out of this carrying guns overseas thing. It's not, the war's going to end, and the war's either going to end because peace is going to break out, or the war's going to end because I'm going to be dead, or the war's going to end because I'm going to get an arm or a leg blown off. Mm-hmm. And so, so got out, and I was like, okay, well, I think I'm going to move into business. And that's where, Rat's Tourniquet and the coffee company and Ready Man, and with the books with Black Autumn, that's where all of that kind of sprang from.
How did that just happen though? Because like with people, you just say it so casually. Me doing business, maybe I'm just I am not the smartest tack in the shed, I guess, or whatever, however the saying goes. But like, it's not like it just happens. It's not like things just start popping off for you, and it's like, oh, within like a couple months, we're making money and sleeping.
No. Within a couple of months, we were like wondering if we're gonna have to go back overseas. So it's like, this ain't working, man. No, we, Evan and I started one business, and it didn't make it. We were probably 5 years ahead of the clock. And so it's like teaching your customer in business, anytime you have to educate your customer. And this is the hard thing as an inventor, right? Because I've got several patents, but anytime you have to educate your customer, it's incredibly expensive, and it takes a lot of time. And so we had our first business was a tech business, but we're trying to teach people what it is that we were doing. It was a crowdfunding, but for the conservative 2A community, which at that time, Indiegogo and Kickstarter was all like hippies and stuff. And so trying to teach the conservatives about, crowdfunding, they were like, you mean like welfare? And it's like, no. And so anyways, it didn't, but it led to other really cool stuff. And when Evan took Black Rifle, and, he was the powerhouse behind that for sure. He was the rocket ship. But what you don't see, it's like James Yeager, from Tactical Response, rest his soul. But James Yeager used to say, he's like, yeah, I was an overnight success that took 10 years. And
exactly.
It's a ton of work. It is a ton of work. It's work. It's luck. There's a certain amount of luck that's in there as well. That's really is followed by just a ton of tenacity, and just continuing to strive forward. You know, my one of my business partners, Ready Man, who I wrote the Black Autumn books with, he was a business guy, right? So he'd never been in the military, he was never a cop, very accomplished outdoorsman. But he used to say is like, you guys have got to learn how to fail faster. You know, try something. If it doesn't work, get rid of it. Try something else. Try something. And really, that's marketing, right? Is if you look at marketing, it's try something, see what the stats, the data that's coming in that's telling you, and say, is this working? Is it not working? It's not working. Don't do that anymore. Move on to the next thing. Or it's working. How do we do more of that? Or it's struggling. How do we tweak that? How do we pull the dials and the levers to make that so that it can then take off? And then social media is like a completely new animal for marketing, because marketing, if it's successful, does this, and then it does this. And so you're constantly trying to find that new thing that you can bring people in on the marketing thing. And a lot of it's just kind of a game and whatnot. And some of it, and there's a bazillion different strategies. With that. Like rats, I took a different strategy, and I mean, we were selling rats when I sold the company, and so my medic is the predominant distributor of rats now. And so the story of rats, right? So I was in Afghanistan, and we were walking up to a target, and anyways, as we're walking up to the target, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, and you've got night vision goggles on, and everything's green and hazy and stuff. And so walking up to the target, and like I said, these compounds, well, in this compound, we were going to use explosives. So there are Al Qaeda guys on the inside. We're going to use explosives, and we're going to blow these big metal gates. We're going to blow them off the hinges and go in, because we were pretty sure it's going to turn into a fight because of these guys. So we wanted to hit them hard, because there was, we weren't sure exactly how many there were, but there were at least 2 guys. And everybody we went after, almost everybody we went after, were mass murderers. So these were people that were trained, they would fight, and they all had machine guns and explosives. So it's like, it's dangerous, right? So it's like, okay, these guys, we're going to hit them hard. So we're up, and we move up to the compound. And so I was a ground force commander. We send the breachers up, and the breachers is just a fancy way of the guys that are, handling the explosive and stuff. So the breachers go up, they're putting the charges on the door. Well, we had gotten compromised. One of the AQ dudes runs out into the compound, and he's got an AK. So he starts hammering rounds through the gate, because he knows we're on the other side, and bullets don't stop when they hit metal gates. They rip right through. So it hits the breachers, 2 breachers up there, hits them in the leg. So now the fight's on. So guys are up on the wall. The gunfight's going on, and so me and the other guy, the Al Qaeda dude, still putting rounds through the gate. We jump up, grab these 2 dudes, drag them down into a ditch that was right next to the gate, right? And so the medics run up there, and the medics start working on them. So it's me, and there's only like 3 or 4 Americans on this target, and the rest are Afghan dudes that are working this. So I'm basically working with the commander to contain the target because of the fighting that's going on the inside. So anyways, there are actually a couple of funny stories from this, but at one point I looked down in the ditch to see how these guys are doing in our medics. So remember, it's nighttime, right? And we're in a ditch, wearing NVGs, black gloves, and then the tourniquet we were using was black as well. And I never publicly say what tourniquet we were using at the time. And so I look down, and these guys are kind of fiddling with the tourniquet because they've got gloves on. It's black, and the uniforms are dark, and it was just one of those moments where it was like, oh, that's kind of interesting, just a snapshot, right? And then it was back in. I was up out of the ditch because I had to go around the thing because there was one of the guys that was going out the back. So anyways, fight gets over, and so now we're calling in medevac, and these 2 guys are both hit in both legs, right? Which, contrary to Hollywood, will kill you. And so, because you'll bleed out, and these are AK wounds, right? And so they're trying to pull the tourniquets off, because where the base plate and the buckle comes together, the skin gets pulled up in there. So they've got these, they came back, they had these black bruises on their legs, and they're like, take this tourniquet off, it hurts. Well, it's hurting because it was pinching the skin. They're getting a big horse bite. So we're having to restrain these guys from taking the tourniquets off. Helicopters come in and off they go. So anyways, that was a snapshot of my head. So I rotated back home, and I had a few weeks off. So I was training some other Americans. And so I was at a training center, and I was training some Air Force PJs, and Air Force PJs are highly trained trauma medics. And so we're running them through close quarter battle through a maze, and we're shooting simunitions at them. And simunitions hurt if you've ever been shot with sims. So it's nighttime. We're wearing gas masks, protective masks to protect the face, but also to simulate elevated heart rate, elevated breathing, which would happen under a high stress situation. So it's protecting the face as well as helping to simulate battlefield conditions. It's the middle of the night. They're wearing MVGs. They're getting pelted with simunitions. And I'm up on the catwalk looking down, and it's like, hey, that guy's got a leg wound, put a tourniquet on.
Which you're referring to night vision goggles, which in night vision goggles, anything that's dark is going to be dark.
Anything that's dark is going to be dark. Yeah, exactly. So it's like shadow. It's green, and shadows of dark, hazy green and stuff. And so these PJs, I'm sitting up on the catwalk, and I'm looking down at the PJs. It's night. It's dark. It's high stress, just like Afghanistan, right? And I'm looking down, and they're fumbling with the tourniquet, just
I've
like
seen this before,
just like my Afghans were. And so it was that moment where it was like, oh, this isn't a training issue. This is a design issue. And so, I was like, well, I'm gonna come up with something better. And so I just started researching and doing prototypes, and prototype number 26 was the one that became the RAT tourniquet, the rapid application tourniquet. So I wanted something that was super simple that you could use, under high stress situations, that would work. You could still kind of screw it up, but it would still be effective. The cleat on the metal portion, the original cleat that I had done was actually a Red Devil. So any guys that are listening that have done explosives, when you put your explosive charge on a door, there's a thing called a pigtail sticking out of the bottom, and it's deck cord that has an overhand loop in it and looks like a pig's tail. And then you tie in with that with a loop, and the Red Devil's a little plastic thing. So your loop that you're tying in was deck cord too. And so you'd put that over the pigtail, and you'd slide the Red Devil forward, and it would lock onto the piece. So then you could run your non-explosive, non-electric instantaneous firing, so your no-nail or shock tube, you could run that back and set off your charge. So the first ones were those, and then I was on a dive team once upon a time ago, and then I was like, well, that looks a lot like a bow cleat, and so then it became a cleat, and so, but that's the story of the RAT. So, but again, it was like, yeah, overnight success that took.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's like, so you have the product. It's great. Way better than what's being used. How do you actually get that implemented?
So at the time, I actually had 2 patents on 2 radically different tourniquets. One is a tourniquet that is built into a belt, which is one of my patents. And it's called Trauma Belt. And we're getting ready to release that one here finally. And then there was the RAT. And the RAT it kind of took on a life of its own. What I did was, because I had limited time and limited resources, what I did was a grassroots movement. I knew that I had a great product. And I quickly learned that trying to educate people, because it's radically different than any tourniquet that was out at the time. And so I quickly realized it's like, there's no way I'm going to be able to educate people on this. But I knew if I could get it in their hands, then I would win people over. So what I did was, and this is kind of the early days of social media, I would get hold of these guys that were doing classes. And James Yeager with Tactical Response was one of the first one that was there. And then also Paul Markle was Student of the Gun, was one of the first ones. And I was like, hey, I show them how to use it. And what do you think? And they're like, oh, this is awesome. Because back, it used to be people that were carrying guns never learned medical stuff. Like even cops, that's a relatively new thing that cops started working as first responders on the medical side. And it saved a tremendous number of lives. The most preventable cause of death on the battlefield and in the civilian world is massive hemorrhage, is bleeding to death. Most preventable cause of death. And so when cops started using tourniquets on people that were in car wrecks, we immediately saw a massive uptick in saving of lives because tourniquets are very safe. They're the safest, most effective means of stopping massive hemorrhage. So the old wives' tales that you're going to lose the limb and stuff like that's absolutely not true. The literature is very clear on that. And um, so I started getting it into the hands of these people that were teaching, and because the rat's easy to carry and use and stuff, and they started putting it out to their students. And so my campaign was, how do I get this in the hands of people? So because I didn't have a lot of money, it was like, look, if I, how much does advertising cost? Well, I mean, it can cost, it can cost a tremendous.
It's the most expensive part of the business.
Can be the most expensive part of the business. And so it was like, well, if I can, and so I would send out samples, like lots of samples. And I started, and because my tourniquet works very well on kids and canines, whereas the other tourniquets don't work on kids. They like to say they do, but you got to do some monkey business, and they don't work well on kids. I mean, when you get down to it, so and so it was like, well, this works on kids. Or then there was a couple of school shootings, and it was like, look, the people that were going in to train, I would show it to them, and I was like, look, I'll sponsor this so that every teacher can have a tourniquet, because it was one of those things too, because I believed in my product, because I had seen in Afghanistan the problems that can be run into. And mind you, my guys were highly trained in those PJs, some of the best trained trauma medics on planet Earth. And so it was like, okay, this and one thing we learned from the war was we went into the war. So I was of the generation that it was a tourniquet was only used in the last resort. And then after we were in Afghanistan for about 2 weeks, well, all of a sudden guys were making it all the way back to Germany, to Landstuhl, Germany, and they were still dying because they had lost too much blood. And so it was just delayed. So they didn't die on the battlefield, but they were dying because they were going into liver failure and whatnot because of the metabolic processes that were taking place. And so it was all of a sudden they were like, you've got to start using tourniquets. And then it was, well, if we use tourniquets, we're going to lose the limbs. And they're like, we're losing the body. We're losing the person. We don't care about the limb. And then it's like, save the body, life over limb, right? And then all of a sudden, people weren't dying.
And limbs weren't being lost.
As limbs weren't being lost. There was one pilot, I can't remember if he's a Black Hawk pilot or a Little Bird pilot. He had a tourniquet on for 8 hours. I do not recommend, they say about an hour, but for tourniquets. This guy had it on for 6 or 8 hours. Don't quote me on the exact time. It was hours and hours. No long-term damage. And so tourniquets are actually very safe and very, very effective. And so saving every drop of blood all of a sudden was like, oh, this is the priority that must take place. And now tourniquets are commonplace. But back then, nobody was carrying tourniquets. And so, and I looked at for me with my product, it's like, well, where's the gap? Where's the meat domestically? I knew I was never going to get picked up by the military or stuff like that. That's too much of a political novel. I was like, but I can help here at home with kids and with teachers, and some women, their arms aren't big either, and we actually have several saves that are small frame women, and so anyways, that's how I get it. So it was a grassroots movement.
When you identified who are the people selling tourniquets, and it's usually the trainers and educators, and so you went to the ones that were educating people, got them samples, and then
said, hey, here you go. Yeah, so it's just figuring out who is your, kind of a rough term that's used now is influencer. I certainly had some influencers, but there were also just regular trainer dudes that that were picking up, and they're like, oh, this is great. Yeah, people. And then it's like one of those blinding flashes of the obvious once you hear it, where it's like, yeah, you're right. If I get in a gunfight, somebody's going to get hit, maybe me, maybe a loved one. I should have a tourniquet on me. And so it was like that natural, like, yeah, of course. And so that's where it just, picked up and started kind of grew hair and became a life of its own. And so after a little bit, when I had naysayers that would come after me because the internet's full of a bunch of trolls,
Of course.
and so
That's how you know you're doing something right, though.
it's like you only draw fire when you're over target.
Well, I love it when people will come out negatively because it's just as good publicity, and it's just great. Like, say something bad so I can say something good. Like,
That's
and it
it.
just is like, oh, please tell me everything I'm doing. Like, you think I'm doing wrong, and so one, maybe they have some points, which I have found a lot. But then the other thing is like, oh, thanks for saying like this. Really, you're teeing me up for a great response.
Yeah, and it's actually was more than one customer because by then I had ReadyMan, and ReadyMan with the emergency preparedness company was selling a ton of tourniquets. And so, people would jump on and they'd say rude stuff on social media. And I was always professional when I wrote back. And I forget, I mean, numerous people that came back and said, hey, man, I saw how you answered that. That was really cool. So I'm going to buy your product. I'm going to test it out. And so I was never a jerk or anything to people. And then it just grew. And then before I knew it, we were selling tourniquets all over the world. And like the German Navy was buying them, and parts of NATO were buying them. And then USAID was buying them. And I was like, oh, well, here we go. And yeah, the rest is kind of history. But so that all tied in with so all of this stuff kind of tied in together on the business aspect of, with Ready Man and Rats and all of that.
Well, what made you make the jump over to like the wellness stuff? Because like, I mean, obviously being in the military, you're athletic and active and probably already care a lot about it all throughout. But let me be like, okay, I want to start doing this as a career.
That's a great question. So when we wrote Black Autumn, so Black Autumn, post-apocalyptic novel, right? And there's three main books in Black Autumn. There's Black Autumn, White Wasteland, and Blood Spring. And then there's novellas between the books, right? So there's that. It's actually a 9-book series. And so what happened was when we wrote Black Autumn was like a wargaming thing that Jason and I had. It was this ongoing conversation where it's like, he's like, how do you think the world could fail? And I was like, I'll tell you how I think it could fail. And he's like, okay, last time you said this had happened, but what do you think would happen? What do you think that would cause? What would be the domino effect? And so it's a bunch of, later on, we figured out it was a black swan event. So it's a whole bunch of little things that tie together in a weird way that cause a crash. So the 2008 financial crisis was a black swan event because there's a whole bunch of things that tied together you really couldn't have predicted. Hindsight 2020, super obvious, but going forward, really hard to predict. So how did I get into wellness? Well, book one is a lot of tactical stuff, right? And when we wrote the books, I was using my experience from being in the post-apocalyptic world, Afghanistan and Iraq and Africa, and looking at that and how people reacted and how tribal they were. But then, and so that was like that was the tactical aspect, and that's the movie Homestead. But then book two is White Wasteland. And if we look at history, when things are really bad, we actually see the mental health of people plummets. And so I'll illustrate an example, right? So at some point in history, the Catholic Church came out and said in the Middle Ages, if you commit suicide, you are going straight to hell. Now, why would they do that? So if we peel the onion, why would they do that? Why would they even care? Well, if you're a government, the power from the government comes from people. People are power. People are power. If I have an army of 10 against an army of 100, I don't care if you got 10 Bruce Lees, you're probably going to lose. The 300 and all that. Yeah, there are these outliers, but the
Well,
overall
that's why that happened, what, 2,000 years ago. There's
2000
still a movie about it.
still have a movie about it, and there all goes outliers that are out there. But overwhelmingly, people are power. So why would the Catholic Church come out and say if you commit suicide, you're going straight to hell? Because there was a rash of suicides that was taking place. So mental health, remember the plagues were going on at the time. Whole villages were disappearing and dying horribly. There was, we were in the middle of a mini ice age that was going on. People were starving. Nutrition was plummeting, dismal times. And people were just basically like, my family's dead, I'm killing myself. Well, now if you're the Catholic Church, right, or you're the aristocracy that's over there, the kings, it's like, where's your power come from? People. Well, if your people are all killing themselves, committing suicide, your power is degrading very, very, very quickly. So it's like, come out and say, well, we know that this happens based off of tumult and time. So to answer your question, why did I get into the wellness retreats and stuff? Because my life kind of parallels the Black Autumn series in kind of a preparedness sort of way. So Black Autumn is more tactical and preparation, which, I'm pretty good at that. And then the next phase is White Wasteland. White Wasteland's actually is a pretty dark novel. I mean, it opens up with a guy committing suicide, knowing he's going to be eaten by the family that's watching him because everybody's starving, like a super flu comes through and kills a whole bunch of society. We wrote this years before COVID, by the way. And so everything is starting and people have a lack of nutrition. So the people that are the therapists and the people that have religion and understanding of psychology actually start gravitating and doing the most good and holding, because if your community starts falling apart, you're going to get overrun, right? So how do you keep your community together? Because before we had counselors, therapists, psychologists, and psychiatrists, we had pastor, priests, and confessors. So how do you tile that together? That is White Wasteland. So why do I do retreats? Because I can look around and say, okay, the next phase of this is I need to know medicine, right? At least a little bit of medicine, which is one of the reasons why I went back to nursing school at the tender age of 50 and reinvented myself. I was like, I want to learn. So I'm by far the oldest person in nursing school. And then started a wellness retreat so that I could start to learn the physical. So physical is the nursing side, but the psychological, emotional aspects of physical, psychological, emotional, and then tie that all together with Mustang medicine. And so people come down to our retreat with Mustang medicine. We call it the rewilding is the retreat. They come down and we teach them tools and practices that they can then take home and share with their family and friends that help them to regulate their nervous system. So it's understanding your nervous system that leads to understanding your brain and how it works, that leads to understanding your emotions, and not how you can control them, but how you can embrace them and understand what is going on. Because overwhelmingly, as we get lots of veterans and first responders and CEOs for that matter, that, your typical guy, an emotion will come in, and what do? We compartmentalize it, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to take that thing and I'm just going to compartmentalize it over here, which is just a fancy word for saying we ignore it, right? And the example I like to tell people is if you've ever seen Pirates of the Caribbean, have you ever seen that movie? Mm-hmm. Remember the admiral is walking down the staircase while the ship is getting destroyed behind him and it's blowing up in splinters and stuff. And he's just moving like, it doesn't matter. It's, look, sir, it's a nice sunny day outside, I say. Well, but then in the next movie, he's an alcoholic.
Oh, yeah.
He's a mess. And so we see this over and over again, that the men and women that ignore their emotions end up later on in life, they're like, remember, you're taking that emotion, you're putting it in your over here, and it's like a brick. Well, those bricks pile up and pile up and pile up. And then what happens over time, it's like a teeter-totter, that the very thing that they were controlling, they were compartmentalizing, wham, all of a sudden controls them. And they become emotional wrecks. Not all of them, but people will talk to them. You start digging in there a little bit. They're like, oh yeah, that's absolutely, that's true. And so what we do is at the retreat, it's like, okay, when that happens, how do we learn from this? Because, and it's funny when people first get there and it's like you talk about emotions and you can almost hear their eyes roll in the back of their head. They're like, oh my gosh, emotions. This is some touchy feely hippie crap. And I go, well, okay. Have you ever been scared? So you're on a SWAT team or you're going on a call. It's the middle of the night. And you pull over a sketchy car full of gangbangers and it's just you. You're telling me you don't have any emotions over that? A little bit of fear, a little bit. And it'll be like, well, yeah, of course. Because the fear is there to keep you alive. There's a reason that it's there. The butterflies in the gut, right? So you have feelings and you have emotions. And so that feeling builds up and that feeling often begets an emotion. And how we interpret that emotion is how we're going to act in our behavior. So I tell people, I'm like, do you ignore that fear? They're like, well, no, of course not. And it's like, okay, so you don't ignore that fear that's in your gut that's happening, then why do you ignore all of the other ones? If you ignore the other ones, it's to your detriment because those emotions are there and they're messengers. That is your body that's trying to tell you something because anytime something happens, you have biochemicals that drive emotions that drive behavior. And this is where positive and negative patterns in life happen, right? Chemicals, biochemicals drive emotions, drive behavior. So if we want to change our behavior into something that's positive, we have to change the emotions. Well, how do we change the emotions? Well, we have to change the biochemical. Well, how do we change the biochemicals? We have to change the behavior. So we change the behavior that changes the biochemicals, that changes the emotions, that changes the behavior, hopefully into something that's positive. Okay, that's really easy to say. How do we do that? You change your behavior because you make reasonable and rational decisions that feel good and right. The two have to work in conjunction. You can't be all in your brain or, for that matter, all in your heart. There has to be balance, right? It's that teeter-totter that's taking place. And so when we do that, then we can regulate our nervous system as the way that it goes. We can be reasonable and rational. If we're purely reasonable and rational, it sounds like that's a good thing. Well, okay. Did Nazi Germany, they were reasonable and rational. At least they thought they were. But what didn't feel good and right, it turned into horrific events. And we've seen episodes of that all over the place. When people are too mechanical, they're not feeling, it can lead to atrocities. Obviously, this is a very extreme example. But if we're just feel good and right, well, we've seen that too. The 1960s Woodstock, free love and stayed around, smoke dope all that. Well, that's not doing anybody any good either. So it's got to be the two that are combined together that then reasonable and rational for those decisions that then change the biochemicals, change the emotions to positive emotions, that then change the behavior to a positive cycle. So that is and then we have some practices and tools that we run people through.
Well, I think there's like even like easier examples that happen with everybody day to day that are like, oh, I could work more and make more money. And like, there's things I need to do. I have my to-do list of things I need to get done that feels super important and urgent for your business. But then you have your family over here that's suffering and you go down this road for 10, 20, 30 years, and then you end up losing your whole family. You're like, how did that happen? And it's like, well, you're a good person. This happens to a lot of good people where they're like good people, they're logical, rational, but they're not doing what feels right to what you're saying. And they segment off that important part of their life. And before they know it, like their family's gone.
Their family's gone, right? But you got to pay your bills. You can't stay home with your kids all day either because, lights aren't free and all of that stuff. So you got to, so it's balance, all things in balance, right? All things in balance. And really that's what we teach is like, hey, when you're out of balance first, the first step of change is awareness, right? And so when you're aware of self, because we now know, right? And this is kind of going around the internet and stuff. 95% of what goes through a human being's brain every day is the same stuff that went through our brain yesterday, the day before, the week before, the month before, the year before. It's redundant stuff. So what that means is we're not present with where we're at the time. So when we become present, which really, when we become aware of ourselves and our surroundings, then all of a sudden, what that allows us to do is we can bring more cognitive thought forward so that then all of a sudden we can go, oh, I'm out of balance. And we all get out of balance, right? I'm out of balance. Then it's a matter of gently pulling yourself back into balance using tools and practices, pull yourself back into practice so that then you're balancing that time with family. What's horrible is, what the national average for quality time with parents and their kids, the national average that time is per week or per day?
I'm going to guess it's really low. So I'm going to go with 30 minutes.
It's 20 minutes. Yeah, 20 minutes is the national average. That's horrible. So is it any wonder kids are having a hard time? They never see mom and dad because both mom and dad are working, right?
Or they're on their phones.
Or they're on their phones. Yeah. So this miracle, right? So phones are a miracle. But like any miracle, it can be a curse. And so all of a sudden, it's like, man, so when the kids see mom and dad constantly, they're trying to talk to you and they're on their phone and they're constantly scrolling or something like that because they're looking for distraction because they have all of the stress.
Well, I think it's addicting too.
And it's addicting. Yep. So it's a dopamine, right? It's free, easy dopamine that then dopamine's highly addictive in the brain. And so they're constantly scrolling. It's there. But now what impression, what patterns are we imprinting on our kids, right? That this is okay, that I'm being ignored. And so now all of a sudden you hear the 20 minutes a day and it's like, that's horrible. So one of the things that we teach is like, okay, how do we find time so that we can stack this stuff together, right? Because you got to exercise and you got to pay your bills and you got to go to work and I got to get time with my friends and I've got to, I've got it and I've got it and I've got it and I've got it. Well, how do we do that so that we can stack this stuff on top of it so we're doing it at once? So like I try to walk every day. I think walking is a phenomenally underrated exercise.
Proven.
Scientifically proven. And so a lot of times I'll grab my kids and it's like, hey, come walking with me. And it's like, yeah, they walk slow, but now I get, now I'm walking for 30, 40 minutes down the trail. And sometimes I'll carry weight or I'll carry, I'll have a kettlebell that I'll walk with, or I've got a tire that I've got a bolt in and I'll, I'll drag the tire down the thing while I'm talking about, and it's fun. But now I'm getting that. So now I'm getting my exercise. I'm working out, I'm walking, I'm spending time with my kids. And so I'm stacking this stuff that's there. But it's taking that moment to go, you know what, I'm a little out of balance. How can I get back into balance? Well, I've got all these things I have to do. Well, you know what? How do I include my kids or my wife into that as well? And so it's a
strategy.
It's a constant strategy. But now the 95% that's going through my brain isn't redundant crap that's been going through my brain for the last month, year, or whatever. Now it's like I am aware of my surroundings so that I can be present for my family and for my friends and the things that I'm doing.
That's awesome. I mean, I think we can do one forever. And like I have a lot of questions even still. So I mean, I'd love to have you back on, or just come go hang out, grab lunch or something. So if people want to find you, like with your wellness stuff, whatever you're doing, what's the best way?
Mustangmedicine.com. You can find us in the retreat that's there. And then readyman.com is the emergency preparedness business that's there. I'm limited on social media. I probably need to get back on it, but those are the two main ways. Like the Black Autumn series is available on Amazon, as well as we sell it on Readyman, and then Mustang Medicine. Those books that we've written for that. So we've written 4 books now for Mustang Medicine, 2 more on the way. They're available on Amazon as well.
Perfect. And is there audio versions?
For the Black Autumn series, yep, there's audio for
read it?
those. No, we hired.
You kill it. You have a great tone of voice. I think that'd be so entertaining. Don't you think so?
Oh yeah, you should do that.
It'd be nice and monotone.
Well, you kind of have like the Ray Porter voice. Have you heard him? He does. I think he does Terminalist. I think, but dude, it's good. Well, anyways, thank you so much. Yeah, if you love these clips, you love these videos, be sure to like and subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram, voxvaldez.podcast, and be sure to give us a follow.